Most people don't think. Not really. They simulate thinking by echoing what others already decided. School taught them to memorize. Society taught them to comply. And somewhere along the way, they lost the ability to ask why and replaced it with, what's next? That isn't intelligence. That's inertia in disguise. You're not reasoning. You're rerunning other people's conclusions. You call it knowledge, but you've never touched the root. You believe things are impossible without understanding the mechanics. You accept rules without knowing who wrote them. You say the world works this way, but you've never taken it apart to see if that's true. That's not logic. That's tradition. On autopilot. I've never trusted that. I was never interested in how things appear. I've always wanted to know why they are that way. And not just the surface why, but the kind that strips everything until only what's undeniably true remains. I ask questions that make people uncomfortable. Not because they're offensive, but because they're too basic, too raw. Questions like, why can't we build reusable rockets? Or, why are electric cars still a niche? Or, why do we even believe college is the path to intelligence? These questions don't break systems. They reveal how fragile those systems already are. You see, first principles thinking doesn't care about precedent. It doesn't ask what's worked before. It asks what must be true at the atomic level, regardless of convention, cost, or comfort. It's not optimism. It's not rebellion. It's physics. It's boiling reality down to its fundamental particles and rebuilding from there with brutal honesty. You tear down assumptions, strip away metaphor, challenge every layer of inherited thought until you hit something so simple it can't lie to you. That's where real solutions start. Not with what's profitable, not with what's popular, but with what is real. People hate that kind of clarity, because once you see the root, you can't unsee the illusion built on top of it, and suddenly entire industries stop making sense. Education, energy, government, even the idea of success. Most of what you chase isn't yours. It was installed, programmed, sold to you by a system that rewards obedience, not curiosity. But if you're willing to question everything, if you're willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing and tear the whole structure down brick by brick, you will think differently. And once you think differently, you live differently. You don't trust price tags. You don't assume authority is competence. You don't follow models. You build them. And no one can take that away from you. Not the market. Not failure. Not fear. That's why I build the way I build. It's not because I know more. It's because I'm willing to know less, on purpose, until I hit bedrock. And from there, everything I build becomes inevitable. If that sounds extreme to you, good. That means your frame is cracking, and maybe finally, something real can grow. Welcome to Mind of Musk. You can't build anything real if you're afraid to break things first. That's what most people never understand. They look at a problem and ask, what have others done? I don't. I ask, what is this? At its core. That's first principles thinking. It's not a method. It's a discipline. A decision to ignore what's familiar and keep digging until the surface breaks, and then dig deeper. It doesn't begin with answers. It begins with doubt. Real, uncomfortable, oxygen-sucking doubt. You stare at something everyone else accepts, and you ask yourself if it still makes sense once you remove the context, the legacy, the convenience. Most times, it doesn't. When I looked at rockets, I didn't see $65 million. I saw metal, aluminum, carbon fiber, a fuel system, sensors, guidance control. I didn't ask how to buy one. I asked why we build them the way we do, and why they burn once, and why that was normal. The answers I got were mostly excuses in disguise. That's just how it works. That's the standard. No one's ever done it differently. But that's not a reason. That's fear, packaged as tradition. So I did the math. Literally. What would it cost to build the parts from scratch? To assemble them ourselves? To remove the markup of decades of bureaucracy and defense contracting? The difference was staggering, and the truth was simple. It was never impossible, just never attempted by someone who didn't think in chains. First principles. Thinking is not about being smart. It's about being unafraid. Unafraid to destroy assumptions, even if you were raised on them, even if they made you feel safe, even if everyone around you still believes them. It's about refusing to take reality at face value, about seeing through the story and finding the structure. Most people start with analogy. This is like that. They did it that way, so we should too. That's how industries stagnate. That's how innovation dies in a room full of MBAs copying the past. But when you start from zero, from physics, from math, from truth, you're no longer repeating. You're inventing. You're designing not for applause, but for function. You're not constrained by reputation. You're constrained only by what is physically possible. That's why first principles works. Not because it sounds impressive, but because nature doesn't negotiate. You can't convince gravity. You can't outvote thermodynamics. You have to understand them and build with them, not around them. Once you accept that, complexity starts to collapse. The fog lifts. And suddenly, what looked impossible becomes inevitable. And the most dangerous part? Anyone can do it. You don't need a PhD. You don't need permission. You just need to stop trusting what feels true and start demanding what is. That's what first principles thinking is. Not a strategy, not a philosophy, a weapon. And the only one that still works when everything else fails. Tesla, breaking the battery myth. They said electric cars weren't profitable, that the batteries were too expensive, that the range would always be limited. They weren't lying. They were just lazy. Everyone assumed the cost of batteries was fixed, so they optimized everything else. Lighter chassis, better software, tax incentives. But no one asked, why are batteries expensive in the first place? So I broke it down. Literally. Battery, others materials, plus design, plus production. Not mystery, not magic. Just chemistry and process. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, aluminum, none of them rare, just mispriced by decades of inefficiency and middlemen. So we built our own supply chain. Our own cells, our own factories, not because it was cheaper. At first it wasn't, but because it gave us control, down to the molecular level. Most car companies tried to retrofit old thinking into new technology. I didn't. I rebuilt the entire assumption tree. If we want clean transportation, then we need batteries to be cheap. If we want them cheap, we have to own the chemistry. Once you accept that, everything else starts making sense, but you have to be willing to go to the root. That's the part no one wants to touch. It's slow. It's hard. It's not scalable. Until it is. That's first principles. You don't chase profit. You chase physics. And if you follow it long enough, the economics catch up. SpaceX, rewriting the price of the sky. When I first said we were going to build reusable rockets, people laughed. They weren't evil. Just programmed. Every aerospace company accepted one core assumption. Rockets are disposable. You use them once. They burn. They crash. They're gone. So they built everything around that belief. A $60 million launch, half of it into the ocean. And nobody questioned it. I did. I looked at a rocket like I would look at a plane. Would you burn a 747 after one flight? No. You'd go bankrupt. So why is that acceptable for space? The answers came fast. Because the re-entry is too violent. Because the fuel load damages the system. Because the engineering hasn't caught up. But those aren't answers. They're reactions. And they're based on fear, not physics. So we tested, we crashed, we exploded, we iterated. Hundreds of failures, millions of lines of code, thousands of late nights, and eventually, we landed a rocket. And then, we did it again. And again. And now the thing they laughed at has become the thing everyone is trying to copy. That's the cost of first principles. Ridicule, isolation, and failure. Before clarity. Before inevitability. Before a new standard is born. Neuralink. Thinking beyond the brain. People think of the brain as sacred, mysterious, untouchable. That's the problem. As long as we treat it like magic, we'll never understand it or fix it. The brain is a system. Electrical, biological, decaying. It's not perfect. And yet, we act like its limits are fixed, that you're born with what you get, and that's it. But what if they're not limits? What if they're just friction? What if memory loss is an input-output problem? What if paralysis is a signal delivery issue? What if depression is an electrical imbalance, not an identity? First Principles demands we strip away every metaphor we've used to describe consciousness and look at what's really happening. Neurons, firing rates, voltage thresholds, latency, signal translation. That's the language the brain speaks. So we built hardware to speak it back. It's not just science fiction, it's translation. Between what the body feels and what the brain understands. Between what you want to say and what your neurons can't send. Will it work? We don't know. Yet. But if you start from what is real, not what is traditional, you're more likely to find something that actually helps. Not a story, not a prescription, a solution. Thinking from first principles doesn't happen once. It's not a breakthrough. It's a discipline, a mental hygiene. Every day I wake up knowing that if I'm not careful, I'll fall back into borrowed thoughts. That's how deep the programming runs. So I build friction into my day. I don't trust comfort. I don't trust agreement. If everyone nods too fast, I assume we've missed something. If a plan sounds smooth, I look for the cracks. That's the default. Interrogate assumptions before they fossilize. I don't use analogies unless I have to. They're quick, yes, but quick often means shallow. So when someone gives me a solution, I ask, what's the physics behind this? What's the math? What's the limiting factor? If they can't answer, it's not a real solution. It's a guess. Wearing a suit. I spend hours asking questions that seem obvious, because obvious is where laziness hides. Why is that part designed like that? Why are we shipping on Monday and not Friday? Why did we choose that vendor? It sounds like micromanagement. It's not. It's system debugging. And most of the bugs are invisible until you ask the dumbest possible question. Most days I make time to read something unrelated to what I do. Not for fun, for friction, philosophy, materials science, ancient history, anything that breaks the pattern. The brain gets predictable otherwise. And a predictable brain builds predictable ideas. I train my team the same way, not by telling them what to think, but by refusing to settle for recycled thinking. If someone tells me, well, that's how it's always been done, I ask them to leave the room. Not because they're wrong, but because they've stopped thinking. It's not comfortable. It's not even always productive in the short term. But over time, it's how you shift from execution to evolution. You stop being a manager of what exists. You start becoming an architect of what could exist. People ask how I make decisions fast. The answer is, I don't. I make foundations fast. I take time to get to the root, to understand the real constraints. Once I have that, the decision is obvious. Not easy. Obvious. That's the difference between guessing and designing. First principles. Thinking isn't about questioning everything you set to develop. It's about protecting yourself from blind repetition. It's how I keep my brain from rusting. It's how I avoid confusing movement with progress, urgency with clarity, action with understanding. And it's why I'm okay with being wrong. Being wrong is only a problem if your ideas are your identity. But if your ideas are just tools, then every wrong one gets you closer to the right one. That's how I train my brain. Every day. Not to be smarter, but to stay awake. Thinking differently sounds noble. But most days it just feels like isolation. You don't get applause for seeing things others can't. You get resistance, confusion, laughter. People don't hate new ideas because they're wrong. They hate them because they make the old ideas look fragile. When I said electric cars could be mass market, I was mocked. When I said rockets could be reused, I was laughed out of rooms. When I said we could merge minds with machines, I wasn't just doubted. I was labeled insane. That doesn't feel revolutionary when you're living it. It feels like everyone's looking at you like you've lost your grip on reality. The hardest part isn't the failure. It's being right, too early. It's seeing what's possible when everyone else sees risk. It's holding on to a vision long enough for the world to catch up. And in the meantime, you lose people. Investors, friends, sometimes yourself. When Tesla almost died in 2008, I wired my last dollar into the company. People thought I was obsessed, delusional. What they didn't see was the math, the physics, the inevitability. I wasn't gambling. I was following the logic to its end. And the logic said, this will work if you don't quit. But believing in first principles doesn't protect you from pain. It makes the pain sharper, because you see the gaps clearly. You see where things are broken, and you can't unsee it. And when no one else moves, you feel like you're screaming into silence. That silence can get loud. I've had days where I questioned everything, where I wished I could unlearn. Just be normal. Just blend in. It's not weakness. It's human. And it never fully goes away. There's a myth that if you think like this, you're fearless. That's not true. I'm afraid all the time. Of wasting time. Of not solving things fast enough. Of failing publicly. But fear isn't the enemy. Forgetting why you started is. The cost of thinking differently isn't just emotional. It's existential. You stop fitting into the categories people use to understand you. You stop being the engineer or the entrepreneur. You become undefined. And people don't like things they can't label. But if you're willing to pay that cost, if you can live with being misunderstood, misquoted, and misjudged, there's something else on the other side. Freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to see clearly, to build without noise, to live in alignment with reality, even when it's lonely. I don't think differently because I want to. I think differently because I can't do anything else. And once you cross that threshold, once you realize how false the world's assumptions really are, you don't go back. You can't. You don't need to build rockets to think like this. You don't need billions or a lab or a team. You need a moment of silence and the courage to ask the questions most people run from. Because the real application of first principles isn't in engineering. It's in identity. Most people don't examine their life. Not really. They inherit it, their job, their routine, their values, even their dreams. Hand-me-downs from parents, culture, expectations. They don't ask, why do I want this? They ask, how can I get it? And in doing so, they optimize a path they never chose. But you can choose differently. You can stop, strip it down, ask, what do I know is true about this? About myself? About what I want? And be prepared for the answer to unsettle you. You might realize you hate your job, not because it's hard, but because it's meaningless. You might realize your fear isn't of failure, but of judgment. You might realize the relationship you're in isn't broken, just based on assumptions no one ever questioned. Start small. Choose one area of your life, not to fix it, to dissect it. Not, how do I make more money? But, what is money to me? Not, how do I become successful? But, what is success without the branding? Strip every concept down until you can no longer hide behind language, until what's left is raw and useless. First, principles. Thinking isn't about having better answers. It's about having cleaner questions. And it takes time. You'll feel lost. You'll feel like everything is too open, too uncertain. That's how you know it's working. You're no longer repeating someone else's script. You're writing your own. It won't make you invincible, but it will make you honest. And honesty is the only thing that survives failure, or reinvention. If you want to try this, start with something small. One belief, one routine, one emotion you've never questioned. Ask yourself, what is this really made of? Who gave it to me? Do I want to keep it? If the answer is no, let it go. Replace it with nothing for a while. Let the vacuum teach you what matters. The more you do this, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, it's no longer a practice. It's who you are. You become the kind of person who doesn't flinch at complexity, who doesn't hide behind trends, who doesn't need permission to think. That's first principles thinking in real life. Not a skill, not a strategy, a way of seeing the world without the lens. Once you see that clearly, you can build anything. But more importantly, you can rebuild yourself. In the end, it won't be the rockets people remember, or the cars, or the factories, not even the headlines. All of that will fade. All of that will be improved, outdated, rebuilt. What might remain is something quieter. The idea that you could look at the world, not for what it is, but for what it's made of. The courage to say, this doesn't make sense, even when it benefits you. The habit of asking why, even when it's easier not to. That might be the legacy. Not the results, but the refusal to copy. Not the products, but the practice of returning to truth. Not the man, but the method. First principles. Thinking is not about Elon Musk. It's not about being a genius or a billionaire. It's about remembering that the world, every law, every norm, every structure, was built by people who weren't smarter than you. And if they could build it, then you can question it. We live in a time where it's easier to be loud than to be clear, where repeating is rewarded more than reasoning, where surface matters more than substance. But you don't have to live that way. You can choose to go deeper, to break things down, to build from zero, even if no one else around you does. That's what Elon did. Not because it was efficient, but because it was real, and real is rare. So when the story of this century is told and people ask what Elon Musk really built, don't say rockets. Say this: he built a new way to think, and now it's yours. If this made you pause, good. That means you're still thinking. That means your mind is still your own. Here, we don't give answers. We challenge questions. So if you're ready to keep thinking differently, there's more. More uncomfortable truths, more quiet revolutions, more clarity, one idea at a time. Watch the next video. Let the discomfort continue. Subscribe to Mind of Musk, because thinking deeply isn't a trend. It's survival.